These are the distant waters of the Pacific Ocean. It's thousands of miles to the nearest mainland, over 4,000 meters deep. Scattered across the ocean floor are these strange little rocks. There are fields of them, perhaps endless fields, the size of a very large country, even larger than India. It's called Clarion-Clipperton, and the millions of rocks on the seafloor are the world's largest reserves of manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt. All of the stuff we don't hesitate to hold in our hands every day in our smartphones and laptops. It's what used to make car engines, airplanes, electrical grids, steel structures, and all of these pristine marine treasures are potentially worth trillions of dollars. And some metals are even more abundant than all land-based reserves combined. But here's the thing, nobody owns these deposits because they're too far out in international waters. But that is not stopping dozens of countries from claiming and fighting over what could be the new oil of the 21st century. This is the famous city of Rome, the ancient city of the once mighty empire that would occupy territories from the British Isles to Egypt. And this is the so-called Salt Road via Salaria, where the rise of Rome began. The point is that salt was a strategic commodity in the ancient world. Well, to survive, because at that time it was almost the only way to preserve and store food. So the Romans began to control the supply of salt from the mouth of the Tiber River. This is ancient Ostia, where this salt is mined, and furthermore, all trade routes to the Adriatic Sea and south pass through Rome. Salt guarantees the city food security. They start earning money from salt taxes. They use this money to build infrastructure and, of course, to fight successfully. By the way, the word soldier, as well as the English salary, are direct relatives to the word salt. The Latin salarium is just a salt ration, a salary, the very money that Roman soldiers received to accompany the precious cargo and then to buy this salt. Wait, what does this have to do with ancient Rome? And this story clearly shows that since ancient times, people have tried to control resources and the routes of their delivery to the consumer, because that's the main reason for the success of associations called states. Salt will help Rome grow into an empire. Gold will build up and then destroy Spain. Sugar and tobacco would redraw the map of the Americas. The search for coal to replace wood would spark an industrial revolution in Britain. Oil will elevate the United States and make the Middle East the world's leading money and war power. Gas will save Russia. The logical question is, which resource is next? And to whom will it bring success and prosperity? As you know, there is no universal answer, because often people know about some fossils long ago, but they use it with efficiency. That's how to hammer nails with the iPhone screen. For example, North American Indians used oil to lubricate their boats so they wouldn't leak. Or radioactive uranium is now the basis of the world's most destructive nuclear weapons, the most powerful power plants. And before that, it was added to porcelain paint to make it more colorful. A similar fate befell another popular metal today, cobalt. Since ancient times, it has been used to color porcelain and ceramics, giving them a deep, dark blue. Now imagine how much more cobalt the world will suddenly need in the next few decades. There's another interesting metal that is also added to ceramic and glass, and its production is increasing every year. Why is this happening? Because both lithium and cobalt, as well as other chemical compounds, are very much needed today, right here in the most popular energy storage device of the 21st century, the lithium-ion battery. The fact is that every such battery consists of a cathode and an anode. The anode is usually made of graphite, and the cathode requires 4 metals that are very popular today: manganese, nickel, cobalt, and lithium. And here, count in your smartphone lithium about 3 to 5 grams, in a laptop already 20 to 50 grams. For an electric scooter, we'll use from 1 to 2 kilograms. For a passenger electric car, from 10 to 50, but for an electric bus, will require all 400 kilograms. And note that every year there are more and more battery devices on the planet. They are getting bigger, heavier, faster, and more sophisticated, which means they need more energy and more lithium. Look at the Mendeleev table. Lithium is number 3. It's the lightest metal on the planet and one of the most reactive. Here's what happens when you drop it in water. It immediately reacts, bubbles up, and melts like an aspirin tablet. And this light, soft, reactive lithium is used to make batteries with very high energy density, but with minimal size and mass. But where to mine this unique metal? So far, from 4 main suppliers: Argentina, China, Chile, and of course, Australia. Almost half of the world's lithium is mined there. But there's another nuance. 90% of the Australian raw material does not stay in Australia, but is sent to where? To China. And why there? Well, because the most productive lithium deposit in Australia, and indeed in the world so far, is 51% owned by a Chinese company. And now, appreciate the beauty of Argentine lithium, or rather the places where it is mercilessly mined. Who is in charge here? Another Chinese company. And this is the landscape of Chile's Atacama Desert. Here, too, they are actively vaporizing metal for future batteries. And it looks like local drivers are doing it, but you can already guess that the main shareholder of the Chilean lithium company is the same Chinese company that controls mining in Australia. Then there is neighboring Bolivia. Very little lithium is mined here, but the country currently has the largest proven reserves of the metal. They are here. This place is called the Lithium Triangle of South America. The metal is found here in the vast and arid salt flats. It's shared by Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, and the 3 of them have more than half of the world's proven reserves. And you know who will win the big contracts to mine lithium in Bolivia? Rosatom and the Chinese again. And why do the Chinese need so much lithium? Most of it is used today to make car batteries. And who's the biggest manufacturer of electric cars? No, not the American Tesla, and not even close to some European Volkswagen, but the Chinese company BYD. They alone sold over 3 million new battery cars in 2023. It is in China where 3/4 of all lithium batteries on the planet are produced today. And most importantly, the Chinese control everything: lithium mining, processing, supply, and the rest of the battery components. For example, the very same cobalt. This silvery metal was invented by a British-American chemist for use in batteries. Later, a Japanese scientist refined the technology. Both will receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Chemistry for their discoveries. And for the first time, this invention will be used only by the Japanese company Sony back in 1991 in the first year. So cobalt, with its properties, increases the number of recharge cycles of batteries and allows them to work at lower temperatures. And in general, it prevents batteries from exploding. Today, almost 70% of the planet's cobalt is mined for the cleanest, greenest, and most technological gadgets, including in such wild conditions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But again, the main investors and buyers of this strategic African metal are the same Chinese companies. Now about nickel. 75% of this commodity, wherever it is mined, goes to a single country, China. Manganese. Again, the Chinese are the main buyers of manganese ore. And finally, the last element in the battery puzzle, graphite. You can see and understand who and how much of it is being produced in the world today. This means that China is actively creating a monopoly to mine or control the resources for batteries around the world. And then they have everything they need to make those batteries right at home. How could they do that? They thought of their own energy security. In 1959, right here in the north of the country, they discovered China's largest oil field, Daqing, which means great celebration. What's the celebration? At that time, China was a fairly agrarian country, and the oil they found was enough for them to be self-sufficient and not dependent on the Soviet Union. Mao had already quarreled with Khrushchev and found enough oil to sell to Japan, which was in the midst of an industrial and automotive boom. But by the end of the 80s, China itself would be reforming and moving forward. New, growing cities and huge populations would require more and more energy and therefore more oil. And in 1993, a historic event would take place. It will determine not only the course of China's development, but also the entire world economy. The Chinese begin to buy foreign oil in mass because their own oil is simply not enough and become the largest importers in the world. And guess how fast the dependency grows? Year 1995, so far it is not the most important item in Chinese spending, less than 2% of the relatively small $2.2 billion. 10 years later, China is already spending almost $42 billion on black gold. It's already 8% of its imports. In 2015, China's oil shipments will reach $120 billion. 2021, $208 billion, and this figure continues to grow. Wait a minute, what does this have to do with domestic lithium batteries? And this is one way to strategically reduce dependence on oil suppliers. A little context to understand. Who needs oil the most these days? For years, the United States has been the primary buyer and consumer. Now China is nipping at its heels and India is coming up fast. But notice how much faster China's oil consumption is growing than America's. And now it's the Chinese who are buying the most of it overseas. But in general, the number of consumers is still the United States because they produce the most oil on the planet. So they need to buy it on the other side less than the Chinese. And another important point, the United States is the most automobile-using country in the world, and you can't live there normally without gasoline wheels. And American railroads are needed primarily to transport freight and then passengers. And then imagine China. You realize that every year your economy needs more energy, and therefore you need to buy or produce more of all of the things that make up that energy: coal, oil, and gas. You have a population of 1.5 billion people. You have a rapidly growing city where people need cars, and you need to move between cities. But at the same time, you have a serious geopolitical competitor that needs a lot of oil itself. He produces it himself so he can influence the prices. And he is also invading the region where this oil is being actively produced with weapons. In short, you have very little strategic resource. You need it very much, and at the same time, you can cut it off. Where are the most of the oil sellers? In the Persian Gulf. And therefore, the most popular route to get to China is by tanker through the narrow Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea. And the only danger here is the United States of America and its ubiquitous army bases and navy. Because if there is a conflict, for example, over Taiwan, and China wants to use force, the U.S. and its allies can quietly block the Middle East oil, which goes to China right here. And 75% of China's needs are just supplied from abroad. So what are you going to do? Well, first of all, not to argue with anyone ahead of time. And second, look for alternatives to oil and everything that goes with it. Instead of foreign-made gasoline cars, you invest huge sums of money to learn how to make and assemble your own cars, and eventually turn them into electric cars. And with a population of many billions, you can't go the way of the U.S., where the family buys a car and the whole country is one continuous highway. Instead, you rely on high-speed electric trains between cities. They may take 100 years to pay for themselves, but at least they don't use oil directly. And within China's busy cities, you will do everything you can to get people to use the same electric cars, electric bikes, and electric scooters. Finally, thirdly, you must become a leader in renewable energy. Despite the fact that China is a major polluter of the Earth's atmosphere because the guys are hooked on coal all the time and suffer from it themselves. In the last 20 years, they have become the world's largest producer of solar power. But more importantly, the Chinese produce less than 80% of the solar panels today. That's all the solar panels on the planet. And when it comes to the wafers and the technology itself, China's share is even higher, almost 95%. Just recently, they destroyed almost all of the European manufacturers thanks to government programs. Those involved in these technologies in China have received cheap loans, subsidies, and land for production. For example, in 2009, the European Union published its famous directive on renewable energy sources. But now it is clear that the guys have sensed that oil will cost less than $100 a barrel, gas is also expensive, so we will move en masse to wind turbines and solar panels. Great idea, they think in China. Let's make some money. And they begin to actively increase production, and by 2018, it grows 5 times. And the Chinese share devours the Japanese, Germans, and Americans. But demand and profitability turn out to be lower than everyone expected. What to do? In 2 years, the China Development Bank lends $47 billion to its own manufacturers to stay afloat and launches support programs so that solar panels can be sold in China, even at low prices. But at the same time, no one there is prematurely closing coal or nuclear power plants. Once again, we should look at where most of China's electricity comes from. The same dirty and bad, unloved coal in Europe, is still number one in China, except that local chemists and engineers are refining cleaning technologies every year. And for the future, of course, the authorities are not forgetting about new energy sources. But Europe has a different strategy to act quickly, here and now. Look at this chart. For the first time, more electricity will come from wind than from coal. Isn't that proof that we're on the right track? Except that at the same time, Siemens Energy reported a $5 billion loss on its wind business. And in 2024, it expects another minus $2 billion. On top of that, the European Union is experiencing a record drop in electricity consumption because electricity prices have skyrocketed. Many industrial companies are becoming unprofitable as a result. But back to China. They produce more and more electricity every year and burn oil, gas, and coal without hesitation. And all those billions of billions spent on solar panels and electric cars are pennies by comparison. But the upshot is that China's technology is beating everyone else's. Because right now, more than half of all new electric cars on the planet are Chinese. They're more stylish, some of them even space chic. But most importantly, they're cheaper and more affordable. Compare. The average price for Tesla today is in the neighborhood of $45,000, and the model of the new world leader in electric cars, BYD, costs twice cheaper, $22,500. Well, or quite minimally, the cheapest Tesla in the United States costs $39,000, and the cheapest BYD in China is $12,000. Or another example, in 1984, Germany's Volkswagen became the first foreign company to open an automobile production plant in China. Shanghai Volkswagen Company. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl arrives in person to sign the historic agreement. Business goes so well that by 2020, 39% of the 9 million cars Volkswagen sells worldwide come from China. A very respectable share, but also a very dangerous dependency. Because now that China and Europe itself are moving massively to electric cars, even such a huge and experienced German beast is finding it hard to keep up with the competition. Volkswagen is losing its Chinese market share and has to cut prices hard. Please, the best-selling Volkswagen ID.3 electric car in its native Germany costs an average of $35,000, and in China it sells for half the price, $16,600. And today, it is no longer the Europeans who are going to open production in China, but vice versa. Except it doesn't look like the EU authorities are expecting much from the Chinese. Let me explain. At the beginning of the 23rd year, the EU countries signed an agreement that in 12 years they will completely refuse to sell new cars with internal combustion engines. But already in the fall of 23, the EU is sounding the alarm that it's not fair. Chinese electric cars are too cheap on the European market, and it would be necessary to investigate and impose tariffs, or the Chinese will kill our auto industry just as they recently killed the production of solar panels. But there is such a possibility because, as I said, Chinese companies have the whole chain in their hands, from raw materials to key products of batteries. Now compare the result. The same Volkswagen ID.3 is made of only one-third of its own components. The American third Tesla is 68%, but the Chinese BYD is 75%. Do you know why? Because the Chinese company, which by the way stands for Build Your Dreams, didn't start in 1995 with cars or buses. It was founded by a 29-year-old Chinese engineer and chemist, now a billionaire, to build cell phone batteries. As a testament to his success, here's what the top battery makers look like today. The leader is BYD, and among the non-Chinese there are only Koreans and Japanese. They are the only ones who started to produce lithium-ion batteries. It is interesting that the struggle for technology and resources, the principle attributed to Lenin, the capitalists themselves will sell us the rope on which we will hang them, wins. For example, a decade ago, the EU's technology guys were betting on green energy to replace coal, oil, gas, or dangerous nuclear power. What do they get instead? Chinese monopolies, because they now have the resources and the necessary knowledge about them, the technology and the distribution in their hands. And this is what happens when you lack some of the pieces of the puzzle, the technology or the strength to seize resources or to defend them. Please, the story of the Democratic Republic of Congo, or former Zaire, is a vivid example. First, a lucrative resource called slaves is discovered in these places. They will be exported to America for plantations. Then, Europeans will find another resource there, rubber, and local tribes in the same slave state will harvest it for the Belgian king. then diamonds, uranium, and now cobalt. And notice, so far none of these resources have made the Democratic Republic of Congo rich, but only the foreigners who mine them. Only instead of progressive Europeans, the same progressive but already Chinese came. I'm sure something similar will happen to pristine places like Clarion-Clipperton. Remember, I started with the undersea deposits at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean? Nobody mines there anymore, mainly because it's far away and expensive. There are millions of beggars willing to carry cobalt by hand to the Congo, and it is certainly cheaper than vacuuming the seabed at a depth of 4 kilometers. And the demand for the same cobalt in the world is still tolerable, i.e., we can live without it. It turns out that at the moment, such deposits are in reserve, for the time being, for the entire humanity. But it will turn into a resource for certain countries if suddenly there will be a shortage of the same cobalt, or it will become expensive and profitable for a long time. That is why the states, through the organization of ISA, are trying so carefully to explore the ground, or more precisely, the bottom. Yes, they are responsible for the entire international seabed, which is more than half of the world's oceans. 168 countries have already signed the ISA Convention. Remember who hasn't signed it. That is, who may not have legal standing. But to get a deep-sea exploration permit, let alone a production permit, you have to work very hard. For example, a company from a large and developed country like Canada has to team up with sponsors from a small developing country like Nauru and apply to the ISA. You can guess that there are already dozens of such joint ventures from all sorts of countries, because no one wants to lose a potential race for free resources scattered on the bottom of the ocean. No matter what political system is in your yard or in your head, who is your president, what climate is outside your window, you will still want to cool down in the heat, warm up in the cold, eat several times a day, turn on comfortable temperatures, tap water, TV, computer, and smartphone. And to do all that, you'll need energy. And to get it, transmit it, or use it, you'll need natural resources that mankind has been fighting for throughout its history. And don't believe those who say that time is past. On the contrary, we're on the verge of a major breakthrough. The populations of South Asia and Africa are growing enormously, and they will need more and more energy and technology. And so we are on the verge of a confrontation and possibly a war between those who have the resources and technology and those who consume them. And yes, whatever new oil may appear in the 21st century, all the previous oil will not go anywhere in an hour, and it will still be fought over. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up in order to support our efforts, and I will see you in the next video.